Our next speaker is James Nugent, who currently is a lecturer at the Faculty in the Environment at the University of Waterloo. But James isn't just an academic. James was involved in some of the struggles to try and reclaim and create good, decent jobs in a number of important neighborhoods in Toronto. And he's a veteran of that, and he also wrote about it. And he has some very interesting things to say about how, in fact, you do and you don't create jobs, what are the structures of how it's being done now. Thanks, James.
Thanks very much, Herman, and good evening, everybody. First of all, how many people have heard of community benefit agreements before? Just raise your hand so I get a sense of the room. Okay, so about tonight I'm going to be talking about whether community benefit agreements can contribute to radical movement building in Toronto. And the short of it is going to be that I think that they can, but not the way that we've been doing it. You might have heard of the Eglinton Crosstown project. It has a community benefits framework similar to an agreement associated with it that allows for 10% of the trades that are people building that new transit system to be from equity-seeking and historically disadvantaged groups. So it's an affirmative action program that's attached as part of that community benefit agreement. The Woodbine Casino, a community benefit agreement was negotiated for it through the City of Toronto, and it has an affirmative action / local hiring target of 40% attached to that casino, as well as other sort of amenities, access to, for the people that live in the area, and social procurement and things like that. So that's basically what a community benefit agreement is. It's a way to leverage the political process in order to get more benefits for the community from a large infrastructure project, from a large real estate development, or any kind of private investment or public investment. So in a way, I hope that talking about community benefits agreements will be a way to kind of link transit with housing and living wages, because a lot of community benefit agreements, especially in the United States, do just that. They try to ensure that when public money is invested, say, in a transit project or subsidizing an entertainment complex, that people aren't gentrified and pushed out of their homes. And so a lot of community benefits in the States are attached to affordable housing. They're attached to living wages, whether it's $15 an hour or some other kind of living wage amount. And they're attached to other things like union card check, making it easier for unions to organize and so forth. Now, it's basically, you might have heard of social bargaining or political bargaining. It's the same type of idea. It's a form of social bargaining or political bargaining rather than collective bargaining that unions do with one employer. It's people that don't have a union. It's just residents that are trying to bargain and negotiate or struggle for more benefits, whether it's from capital or from the state. Now, there's a lot of critiques of community benefit agreements. I'm not going to be able to get into all of these. Some people have noted that there can be trade-offs between different neighborhoods or between different social groups, depending on how community benefit agreements are arranged. It could be just reformist or concessionary sort of, rather than more radical demands. It could be a form of negotiated neoliberalism, in other words, or a form of negotiated gentrification. So yeah, we have affirmative action building the Eglinton Crosstown, but it's being built through a poor neighborhood, and all those people are being pushed out of their houses as soon as that subway's built, because there's no provisions around ensuring that affordable housing is maintained around the publicly funded transit system. So there are critiques of CBAs and community benefit agreements, and I think that what I want to say though is that there have been some good things that came out of the Toronto Community Benefits negotiation for the Crosstown. I spent 4 years of my life working on that, and there was a few reforms. For one thing, employment equity or affirmative action hadn't really been talked about since the 90s, since Mike Harris put that to rest, and the Liberals didn't resurrect it. So it was the first kind of resurrection on a broad mainstream level of affirmative action, or what we call in Canada employment equity. It's an offensive struggle, so it's not just about protesting to make sure things don't get taken away. I think we're on the offense. We're trying to get something more that hasn't been there yet. So I like that, and more than anything, it was about coalition building. And so you have, for example, building trade unions representatives in the same group with grassroots community groups and some social agencies or social enterprise people with unions. These are groups that don't usually talk to one another, and I think there's a lot of potential in bringing people into the same room. And at the end of the day, there were a few hundred people, and will be a few hundred people that benefit from these types of community benefit agreement provisions. But what I want to say is that the key radical potential of community benefit agreements is not about these specific provisions or outcomes or outputs. And I think that both the Eglinton Crosstown and the Woodbine Casino CBAs were far too meager or modest in what they're asking for. I mean, we have more than half the population of Toronto is from racialized communities, so to have a target of 10% or 40% doesn't even make any sense. But what I will say is that the radical potential is actually in their ability to create an organizing body and an organizing opportunity. And so I want to just end with by identifying 5 key principles that I see for building power through CBA organizing. And the first one is that we have to think about the goal. And the goal is not to win a deal, okay? The goal is to build movements and to build power. And so we shouldn't be getting into the minutia, I don't think, of negotiating for years for some kind of compromise. We need to pressure, we need to build power in our communities and push the government to give us what we want. And it might not be everything we want, but we need the focus should be on building the power, not negotiating kind of reforms and trying to implement them. And that, I think, was one thing that got sidetracked with the Eglinton Crosstown, is that we got involved with social agencies that wanted funding to implement the programs, but we forgot about the political movement building piece. So the goal is important. Second was we have to raise expectations. Too many times I heard within the leaders of the Toronto Community Benefits Networks, as well as the government, saying we need to moderate expectations or lower expectations or manage expectations. No, we need to raise expectations. The problem right now is expectations aren't high enough amongst people, right? But we have to do it honestly. So we can't just go tell people, if you do this and this, then we're going to win all these things. No, we have to say, look, there's a good chance we won't win anything, but if we don't try, then for sure we're not going to win anything. And in the process of trying to win, we're going to build these structures and this power that's going to bring us into the next struggle. So we have to raise expectations, and we have to do it honestly. And that the coalition must be led by people, by grassroots groups, not by social agencies that are tied too much to the state and to funding and so forth. And so that means building, the fourth point is building a broad-based coalition, and that our strength is always in our numbers. And so we have to, one of the things we didn't do with the Toronto Community Benefits Network and the Eglinton Crosstown is link up with affordable housing people, with anti-poverty people, with people working with ex-offenders, with migrant rights, with people. Police carding was a huge issue in the West Eglinton area, but we didn't connect with those groups, and so that has to be a grassroots coalition, and the anti-privatization, the anti-P3 folks, because the Eglinton Crosstown is a P3 after all. So we needed to really connect with all of these groups and make a much more radical struggle. Now, of course, that wouldn't, the fear was that then Metrolinx and the government won't really negotiate with us because they'll think we're unreasonable. Well, of course they will, but until we build the power, and we'll do that through that kind of organizing, we'll be able to actually get much more far-reaching demands. And then the fifth thing is that we have to engage, we have to organize, we can't service. And so the Toronto Community Benefits Network, I think right now is a little bit too focused on kind of servicing a few people and giving them access to jobs, which is important, right? Employment equity is important. But what's more important is consciousness raising, right? And so people that are benefiting from a community benefits agreement have to understand the broader picture about what it's trying to do politically. And it has to be, we have to understand it as that they're part of a movement, okay? Even better, they have to lead that movement. And that gets to my last point, is that leadership has to be cultivated and produced from the grassroots. And it can't be a professionalized network of unionists who know how to negotiate, who've done it before, or social agency people that it's their job to do it. It has to be cultivated and developed from below. And I think those last 3 points all speak to a radical, democratic, and decentralized organizing structure. And I think that really is where we have to look to. So just to conclude, I do think there's a lot of radical potential in community benefits agreements. And I'm very sympathetic and I support everyone who's been doing that work. I've done that work. There's a lot of great people doing that work. So this is by no means a slight to anyone who's been doing that kind of work. We have to do that work. But we can't be focusing on the outputs, on winning the deal. We have to focus on community benefit agreements as a movement building tool to build more radical and lasting power. Thank you.